Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here at Activate Learn on Twitter. It is time for another book review, and this time around it is a book that I did read over about 4 days, but it kept me thinking throughout, and I had to consistently go and do some investigation and research because there are a lot of elements in this book that, well, let's just say economics and financial money markets are not my background. So as I was reading the book, I thought I am reading something really deep here that I need to understand, and I would scurry off onto YouTube and do a search to try and understand the intent. But let me show you the book. It is Yanis Varoufakis, Another Now. It's his latest book. And Another Now effectively talks about Despatches from Alternative Present. Now, I'll read through this back blurb so you can understand what it's about, because I took some of my own notes, as you can see here, just to try and capture and make sense of what I got out of this book. So what is Another Now about? It's what would a fair and equal society look like? Imagine it is 2025. Years earlier, in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008, a global high-tech uprising has birthed a post-capitalist world in which work, money, land, digital networks, and politics have been truly democratized. In a thought experiment of startling originality, world-famous economist Yanis Varoufakis offers a glimpse of this alternative reality. Through the eyes of three characters, a libertarian ex-banker, a Marxist feminist, and a maverick technologist, we see the genesis of a world without commercial banks, stock markets, where companies are owned equally by all staff, basic income is guaranteed, and global imbalances and climate change cancel each other out, and housing is socialized. Is liberal socialism feasible? Can prosperity grow without costing the earth? Are we able to build a good society despite our flaws? Really interesting premise, this book. So I picked it up because I knew of Yanis Varoufakis when he was the Greek finance minister back in 2008. And at the time, my parents were in Greece and kind of living all through this time. And I actually quite liked the bloke because I thought he rubs people up the wrong way. And if he's rubbing people up the wrong way, especially the Germans, he's got to say something, like we should sit up and listen. So I bought his books, Adults in the Room, which I read, and also this brilliant one, Talking to My Daughter About the Economy, which I highly, highly recommend for anyone who wants to understand how the economy works, because it's written in such a way that you can easily understand it. And so these two books I kind of kept hidden away from my parents because for some reason all my Greek friends and people from Greece didn't like the bloke, whereas the rest of us around the world were actually thinking we like his ideas. So it was really funny because when my dad came back and had a chance to really see it from another perspective, he started saying, "Ξέρεις κάτι, Eleni? Do you know what something, Helen? Έχει κάτι να πει." Okay. And so we did a bit of an exchange with my dad, reading books and everything, and so his mind was changed then. But those two books and his latest one, this is really interesting because as I was reading this book, I thought, man, this is brilliant. I love the concept. The concept was that imagine you're in 2008 and something happens and you go on, there's two tangents. So we go a different path of how we've made certain decisions, and the present now, which happens to be 2025. So he's used 5 years ahead in the future in this alternative reality versus what it would be, which is where we are tracking now in a capitalist world in 2025. So what we're seeing in 5 years' time, you can imagine Big Brother surveillance, big business, Amazon's, Facebook, Google's kind of swallowing up businesses, bailouts, debt, and poverty. So that's kind of like where we're heading towards, versus if we had made different decisions in 2008, what would this alternative reality, a marketplace, I guess, where it is fair, it is equitable, what would that look like? And I must admit, lots of these things, there are concepts here that go over my head, but as I was reading it, I thought to myself, this is a really interesting book because he presents 3 different perspectives and 3 different characters, which are actually 6 different characters plus additional characters. So, for example, he uses Costa, which is the technologist, the maverick technologist who discovers a machine who can speak to the future. And as he's sharing information, he gets an understanding of how this new world works and what it looks like and how they do things. Now, his counterpart, who happens to be him in an alternative reality, is named Gosti. So what Yanis has done, he's actually changed some of the names. So Costa or Gosti, his future equivalent, is a technologist. Eva is a libertarian ex-banker, and I must admit I don't really warm to her. And Iris is the Marxist feminist, who is the one I kind of relate to the most. And they all have their own equivalent future person, and they're exchanging ideas and exchanging how this society looks like. Now, I wrote down here some kind of my own notes. I had to write these down because of the concepts that I wasn't grappling, but as I was reading it, I was understanding the intent and the enormity of what he was saying here. And so, I mean, I wrote the good and the bad, but it's not technically the bad. I've written the bad here, but that's because my command of the English language isn't as good as Varoufakis, believe it or not. So what did I like about this book? Well, number one, it kept me thinking long afterwards, and I would have to stop and I would have to go and look up on YouTube and just see the concepts. And I grappled with some of the, I guess, I always thought what socialism was about was that one step next to communism. So every time I would pick up the book, I would be thinking of the Russian song. Yeah, that one. But I just realized that's not what they're talking about here. And so he's talking about a democratic socialism, which is different to socialism that kind of people think that it is. So all of a sudden I had to kind of understand and go back and try and recalibrate what I thought my beliefs were around this system. Okay. So that was one thing I got out of it. The second thing that I loved was the concept of it. The fact that 3 different perspectives, technically 6 different perspectives, all mingled. The person who was pulling it all together, which is obviously the author, and written in such a way that as you were reading it, you think, should this might actually work. And as you were reading it, you know that what we're living in nowadays, being a capitalist world, it's not really true capitalism if the big businesses like Amazon and Google and Facebook are making a mozza and they're not giving back to society in some way. And so I love the concept because it was like I was reading a Greek philosophy book of Aristotle or Plato, asking questions and having these discussions, these philosophical discussions with their friends. It also reminded me, I guess, of growing up in a family where we did have these philosophical discussions a lot, and I don't seem to have it nowadays anymore with my peers. Or I guess the conversation has changed, and so where we should be talking and articulating our thoughts and having real deep discussions that really challenge our beliefs and actually pinpoint the things that are truly wrong with this society and letting go of the political correctness, I'm not having anymore. And I kind of miss it. And so reading the book was something that I really liked. Now, the other thing I loved about this book was he integrates the historical elements of ancient Greece, and he integrates obviously the Greek names as well, and especially names from Crete, which is where my heritage is from. So it's always nice to see one of the characters making a dish of lentils and you kind of assuming he's making fakes. Or when he's drinking raki, we don't say raki, we say tsikoudia. And so when you see little elements like that, you kind of, for me, I kind of connected with it because I go, yeah, I can understand where he's coming from here, certainly with the characters. I wouldn't say the bad things, the things that they're not bad, they were my thought provokers. The things that really made me sit and think was the fact that the concepts here were quite mind-blowing. In the past, currently, when people talk of how things could be different, no one actually paints a picture of what that difference looks like. What will the world look like? They throw up terms like universal basic income, and then you think, no, I can't do that, because what if I want to make more money, or what if, I'm paying people to laze around and do absolutely bugger all. So all of a sudden there's clashes with what we assume it means. Similarly, the word for me that kept popping up in the book that I had to kind of grapple with was this word comrade. Whenever I think the word comrade, again, what comes up in my head? So yeah, do you get my drift? So I'm thinking the last thing I want to do is like move into a communist world. But again, this is not what he's saying here. He's actually presenting a different alternative that may work. But at the same time, in this book, he also says that it's not going to be perfect. It's not perfect. And indeed, in one part of the book, one of the characters, Iris, goes through something, and that when push comes to shove, they have to decide whether they want to stay in the current present or go into the alternative reality. And she decides that she wouldn't. And I really warmed to the Iris character because I found myself, as I was reading this, going, well, what would I do? And so this whole book really challenges you to think about, what would you do? Would you make those hard decisions, knowing that the system isn't perfect either, but knowing that the current system that we're in is definitely not perfect. In fact, it's getting worse. It's unequal, and it's causing so many problems around the world. So what would you do? If anything, this book to me came out as being that there's just one big massive challenge ahead. I don't know if the virus, and even though he mentioned the coronavirus briefly and how they took a different approach to it to solve this pandemic, I don't know if the virus is important enough, or that's not the word, is the thing that makes the world change. I think there's got to be something worse, something a lot more painful to go through before we can actually really change, if that makes sense, and consider an alternative. Maybe we're getting there, I don't know. So this book really got me thinking long after I finished reading it, and it struck me as the fact that this is an important work. It is considered kind of like a science fiction, but it's a speculative fiction. But it's written in such a way that you're seeing this is what's happening now, and this is what could be possible in the near future. The other thing that you might be thinking, well, okay, Helen, what did he say about some of the things that would happen in, I guess, in alternative reality? And he called it the corpo syndicalism. So imagine, I come from a corporate background. I hated my corporate life, despised it because of the hierarchy and the fact that if you had new ideas, they were quashed. And anyway, regardless, it's not about me. You get my drift. So it says in this new world, there are no bosses. Now, before you jump the gun and say no bosses, there's different ways and means of being able to do the work. So there's no bosses and no wages. Hold out with this idea. His idea was that in this near alternative reality, every person gets what's known as personal capital, or he called it per cap, and it's in 3 parts. The first part of this, your personal capital, is what's known as accumulation. Now, that accumulation is your pay, your basic income, your bonuses. So as you're working, that gets paid to you by the company, and that's what you accumulate. It's part of your per cap. The second third is your legacy. Now, what he was saying was every baby that is born gets a sum of money that once they reach of age, say 18, they've already got a pool of money that they could use to build a business, to study, to do whatever, okay? So that's capital they could use, and I take it that's also superannuation. So that's another part of what we could have. So the second part of this per cap is your legacy fund. And the third one is what's known as the dividend, and that is the universal basic income, a monthly sum that is determined by your age, and get this, it is funded by corporate revenues. And before you go, oh my God, the companies are going to pay for, basic income and all that. Thing is, 5%, he's saying, imagine 5% of the corporate revenues of the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Microsofts, paying everyone this universal basic income. It doesn't stop you from going out and having a job and having more money, so you could supplement it to go into your accumulation fund. So he was saying all companies' income, 5% of it goes towards revenue to government, which is that universal basic income, and then 95% kind of split between fixed costs, R&D, and basic payments to staff, bonuses and so forth. But then the staff at that company get a say in the company, so they're not working for shareholders, they're actually working for the company, which is a great idea. And they get, for every person, they have 1 vote and 1 share. So everyone's got a share in the company and a vote that they could vote against things that they want to do, whether they want to recruit people, everything's done through a vote. Okay. I had to explain it in that way in order to vocalize my understanding of it, because I had to do some homework and try and understand what he was trying to say. Because like I said, I'm not an economist. I don't understand the financial markets, but I understood the enormity of what I was reading, because it required a mindset change and some real hard questions to be asked for myself to see, well, how would this work? And that is one of the concepts. The other concept that was very interesting, he does talk about social housing, climate change. He talks about patriarchy as well, which was very interesting, and one of the parts of the book that I really enjoyed. But throughout the whole book, man, I had to stop and think about what it was that I was reading. It was actually quite mind-blowing. If I could improve or say something that could have been done a lot better, and it would be, and it's no biggie whatsoever, it is the fact that as I was reading some of the bits, the most important, so the way he writes it, he explains, so there's the chapter title, he explains it in the formal language, and then he provides an example, and then kind of like a thought-provoking end that leads on to the next idea. Now, that example was something that I honed in on and I explained, but the examples, they were right at the bottom of the book. And what did I want to do? I wanted to pick up my phone and go, take a photo, put it up onto Twitter and share the message of that paragraph. But the bloody paragraph was split down the bottom and then on the top. So that meant me going, like click, click, and then putting the photos together. And in the end, I thought, what am I doing, Helen? Tikani se, You can't do that. Man, why are you feeding the system as well? Forget it. So you may as well just read it, understand it, and do this video and share it that way. So I guess for all authors out there, if you want to make it a little bit structured, make your important message up in the middle so you can take photos of it and send it on through the social media accounts. Look, that's really minor. I am jesting, of course, but there you go. Yanis Varoufakis, Another Now, Dispatches from Alternative Present. One of the best books, most important books I have read in 2020. And as you can see, my book review today has gone longer than others, but I do hope that you take the time to read this and let me know what you think if you've read this book, because this is one thought-provoking book. Okay, then that's it for now. Thank you for listening and watching. Bye. Adieu.